Greetings and welcome to another episode of Two Ball Guys. My name is Eric Giordano and I am the Executive Director of the Wisconsin Institute for Public Policy and Service, also known as WIPS. And I am joined by my awesome co-host, Dave Anderson. Hi, Dave.
Awesome co-host. Thank you, Eric. I really appreciate that. Yes, my name is Dave Anderson. I'm a senior policy fellow at WIPS. And today we're going to be discussing the future of broadband with two very special guests who are working diligently on these issues. For those who might not be familiar with WIPS, we're a unit of the University of Wisconsin system, founded in 2007, with a mission to educate and engage citizens, develop future leaders, and bring the resources of the university to address community identified needs.
Thanks, Dave. And I'm excited. I mean, I've got my first vaccination. I've got my second vaccination scheduled. I know you've had yours, right?
No, not yet.
Oh, you haven't. Oops. Well,
thanks, Eric.
Hey, make sure you sign up, Dave. And I see that the CDC has come out with some new guidelines that are starting to allow more personal contact for those who have received the vaccine. And Dave, if we're going to get together for dinner, you really have to get vaccinated, okay?
Absolutely.
But anyway, it really feels like we're turning the corner here, and we just encourage all of our guests and our guests, listen to me, our audience members, and you two guests when you get on here to get your vaccines. And we want everyone to be safe and to be able to return to a more human-centered world. Speaking of being reconnected to the world, Dave, I had to get my driver's license renewed recently, and when the DMV worker handed me my new license, it came with a note. I was a little surprised to see a note. And thought it was a little strange, but then when I read it, it actually made perfect sense. It said, your forehead is so big, the photo on your driver's license has a note underneath saying, to be continued on the back. So I just thought that was really helpful.
That's a great story, Eric. And we've talked about your forehead before on the show. So thanks for bringing that back up again. And you know, it actually reminds me, this is an absolutely true story. It reminds me of the time I submitted an application for the TSA pre-check program, you know, where you can kind of bypass the more rigorous way to get onto an airplane. You've got to do an interview, of course, once you submit your application. And I was sitting in front of the agent who was looking at my application, and she stopped and she looked up at me, and she looked down at the application again, and she looked up at me again, and she said, "Really, Dave?" And I said, "What?" And she said, brown hair, a force of habit, I checked off brown hair on the application. And she said, maybe gray hair or maybe no hair would be better for you. And we kind of had a laugh about that, but it's an absolutely true story. So I know what that's like. And speaking of the COVID shot, yeah, I'm not 65 yet. I know I'm old and retired, but I turned 65 in August. I'm pleased though that I'll be in the next group eligible for vaccinations starting next week. So I'm hoping to get that scheduled and taken care of as soon as possible, which I hope everybody does as well. So,
yeah. Well, thanks, Dave, for sharing your version of humor, making my day a little bearable. I appreciate that. You know, speaking of which, if our viewers have any words of wisdom in the form of hair puns or jokes of your own, you can always put them in the Facebook chat or email us at info@wips.org. That's info@wipps.org. And it's time to give a quick shout out to our producer, our long-suffering producer, an incredible producer, Luke Rudolph, who also is our marketing coordinator, chill hop DJ, and token representative of an attractive younger demographic. Thank you, Luke, and especially today because I heard you're having a few technology problems, and thanks for getting us organized. We appreciate that. And we also have another technology staff member who's helping us out today, and that's Katie Schramm. So we just want to say thank you to you too, Katie.
Yeah, Luke and Katie, we really appreciate what you do behind the scenes. And it's kind of ironic that we're doing a show on broadband today, and Luke was having some internet issues. I thought that was just kind of ironic when that started happening this morning, but I'm glad that's behind us, and Luke is with us yet again. And now it's time to get to today's special topic on the future of broadband in Wisconsin with a couple of special guests, including Angie Dickerson. In 2015, Angie was appointed to head up the Wisconsin State Broadband Office, which is housed in the Public Service Commission. Most recently, in 2019, Angie returned to her Minnesota roots and joined the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development to serve as the Broadband Development Manager there. In this role, she oversees a portfolio of $85 million in broadband infrastructure investments across the state and works with various stakeholders, including the governor, legislators, providers, and communities to promote broadband development initiatives throughout Minnesota. Our second guest is Alyssa Kenney, Director of Digital Access as part of Wisconsin's Public Service Commission. Prior to that, Alyssa was the Executive Director of DaneNet, DaneNet, an organization that has helped households enroll in low-cost home internet, taught basic computer skills and distributed computers to low-income families. We also want to give a shout out to Brittany Beyer, who was originally scheduled to join us but couldn't make it today due to a family emergency. It's not life-threatening, so we don't want to alarm anybody, but we wish her and her family well. And we want to welcome and thank Angie and Alyssa for being here. So welcome to the show, you two. There they are.
Thank you, Dave and Eric. Hey, I'm pleased to be with you all today. I'm just going to share in my building here, they are apparently now testing the fire alarm system. So I suddenly jump and go mute, but it's just a test. That's what I've been told.
This would have been a great show for April 1st, wouldn't it? I mean, this seems like one thing after another. Hey, I'm going to jump right in with the first question. And okay, we're going to stoop to asking the report card question, and I hope it doesn't get either of you in trouble. But given your mutual experiences, one in Minnesota, one in Wisconsin, respectively, how would you grade current broadband access and service in each state? And tell us a little bit about why you would assign your respective state that particular grade. And whoever wants to go first can go first.
I'll go first while it's quiet here. And you know, I gave that quite a bit of thought when you all were asking me about that, and there's no good answer there, and because it depends on who you're asking.
Well, Alyssa, would you like to?
I think I can keep going, but here's the
great.
thing. If you live in a community where you have high quality, reliable access to the broadband service that you need to live and thrive and survive in today's economy, I would give the state an A+, and the broadband providers who are providing that service. And even as we're getting close to achieving our state goals, if you're in the community that doesn't have that access today, that spent part of the winter in a parking lot to access free Wi-Fi so that you could telecommute or so your kids could stay connected to school, we're definitely not getting a passing grade. So we're making progress, but there's a lot more to be done.
Yeah, I thought much of the same as Angie when I read this question. Is it depends so much on your geographic location, and it also depends so much just on your individual household circumstance, right? There's some folks who live in a city or a town or a village that has great broadband access, but for some reason they can't access it. They can't afford it, or even possibly, you know, they live in a apartment building that has a agreement with a particular provider and they have arrears with that provider. There can be other barriers. And so it's both an issue of geography and cost for families throughout both states.
Yeah, thanks. And we hope to dig in a little bit to some of those responses, but we appreciate that. Now, according to Pew Research, Wisconsin and Minnesota are both considered positive models of broadband policy and implementation relative to other states. For example, in the case of Wisconsin, for instance, I read that there's a publicly stated goal that every Wisconsinite will have access to affordable broadband service by 2025. So I'm not sure what about Minnesota, but I wonder if you could both elaborate a little bit on what Minnesota and Wisconsin are doing right. What is it that they're doing well?
I can go first this time. And so I think one of the things that Wisconsin's doing well is we have just a really, and you know, this was under Angie's leadership also, but just a really strikingly effective grant program. It's been really successful at leveraging infrastructure projects where they're needed into unserved communities. It's been incredibly successful at leveraging additional public and private dollar investments into the state. And then I think what's special and unique about Wisconsin is that our grant program has really fostered and promoted these public-private partnerships where the community gets a say in some of the program, and they're working in partnership with a provider to really make sure that their voice is in it, and that the provider is meeting the community's needs, and then that the provider is left sort of financially whole when they're expanding into these sparser areas. And so I think the grant program in the state of Wisconsin, which has continued to grow, as one of our great successes and something that was mentioned in Pew.
And I would echo those things. You know, when I think about both our states, I think about leadership from the governor's office through the commission in Wisconsin, the Department of Economic Development, state of Minnesota. Our states have broadband task forces, which are wonderful, and that public-private partnership is key. Both our states have broadband providers who, particularly during this pandemic, went above and beyond to help folks get connected. Again, we are very much aware of where the gaps are, and we definitely need to close those gaps. But it's that in leadership at the beginning of both of our programs that really helped move our states forward. And I would say in Minnesota, that started with the task force that then through its annual reporting process, encouraged the governor and the legislature to put speed goals in state statute. So currently Minnesota has 2 goals in statute, a 2022 goal to have ubiquitous 25/3 access, and a 2026 goal of a 100/20 access. Our current governor's broadband task force is in the process of evaluating those speed goals in terms of the lessons we've all learned through the pandemic. One of the big ones being that upload speed is more important than it's ever been. We look forward to those conversations, but I really have to say that public-private partnership, where we see communities working with a provider to solve that broadband access issue, that's where we've seen the most success.
Hey, Dave.
Eric, we do have a viewer question, but I want to ask this question first because it ties in really well with the question that you just asked, and that is talk a little bit about the flip side. What are the biggest barriers or challenges to broadband access in Minnesota and Wisconsin? And then we'll get to our viewer question after that.
I'll go. In terms of the barriers, we're still there. We're still there with the population density issue in our rural areas and the difficult path to a return on investment for providers to build out infrastructure in those areas. And again, as Alyssa mentioned, it's another point that was clearly driven home for all of us with the pandemic, that we have communities across our states that have terrific broadband access, but affordability is an issue for folks. So those are the barriers that we still face today.
Wisconsin's the same, that geography and that issue of return on investment. You know, we have some beautiful scenic bluffs, and we have cranberry bogs, and we have granite, and we have, you know, a variety of geography that can make connectivity really a challenge. And then many communities, the incumbent provider that originally had facilities, you know, they're dependent on that provider often to really build their infrastructure to support the community as they want to grow. And sometimes the provider that has the incumbent facilities has, you know, different priorities, like, you know, maybe they're pivoting to 5G in urban areas. And so it can really be a challenge to meet that essential community need and also meet the business need of the internet service provider that's trying to, develop their own business model and make sure that their company is relevant and keeping up on technology and all the pressures that they have. And sometimes those needs are aligned really well, but sometimes they're not aligned, and that can be a real challenge.
Yeah, thanks. And that really leads well into an audience question we received, which goes like this. What actually are the government's roles, authority, and resources to enhance more broadband coverage when broadband carriers, like you just described, are independent entities and maybe don't have a good return on investment, as you put it?
In Minnesota, and I know Wisconsin is the same. What came out of some terrific public policy in both states was the creation of broadband offices and grant programs to help incent that investment, to help provide that path to a return on investment, and to encourage that public-private partnership. And again, I can't stress how important that is. I look at communities across the state, and as we are on the edge of significant federal and state investment in broadband infrastructure, it's important to connect with these associations of broadband providers, reach out to them. That's a good starting point. Of course, connect to your state broadband office. They can help you establish connections with those companies that may be able to provide service. And I had a great example that I just yesterday chatting, Dave, with one of our former colleagues, Marianne Lippert. She was working with communities in Wood County to help them successfully receive state broadband grant funding through the PSC. And in discussing this with her, a big part of their success was working with their school districts as well.
This is such a great question because our office frequently receives calls from people who maybe don't have service or their speed is inadequate for what they need for learning or working. And sometimes they're calling our office in the hopes that the call to our office and the submission of their address will get them broadband. And it is difficult to explain that we don't regulate that, and we don't have the authority as the government to come in and have a private business serve them. And so I think the grant programs are a really excellent opportunity to incent that. I know in Wisconsin, there's continues to be some barriers to municipal broadband. So the opportunities for a community to build their own infrastructure and survive it is possible. There's just, studies and some pilots and some things those communities have to do if they're interested in pursuing that. But it is really a challenge because broadband is, regulated like an information service, not a communication service. So very, very light regulation. And the role of government is these grants and these partnerships and building those partnerships.
Eric, you'll be very pleased to hear this. Not only is your mother one of our regular viewers, but apparently my sister is a regular viewer. She just texted me a question. And I don't know if there's a good answer to this. So shout out to my sister. Thanks for watching today. I appreciate that. But she says, ask when we are going to get better and affordable internet up north. My sister will be happy to know that we talked about that before the show started. A mile down the road, high-speed broadband is an option, and we can only get broadband through satellite. It just seems so strange to us. At our place up in the northern part of the state. There's probably not a good answer to that, but it kind of revolves around the very thing that we're just talking about, right? So, any reaction to that at all?
Oh, just one thing I would mention that in the Governor Evers' proposed budget, there is a line extension grant program. And a line extension grant program probably won't cover a mile, but it will hopefully help, if it's approved, it would help households with those 100-yard across the street, so close yet so far away situation. And because we know just the way infrastructure is built, that there's households throughout the state that are close. We also know that there's a lot of households that know they have, a fiber run through their front yard, but it's often middle mile or some type of facilities that doesn't just mean just because there's fiber on the county highway in front of you doesn't actually mean there's necessarily internet service available to your home. But for some people there could be, and hopefully this line extension program will be approved, and that might be something that would solve some of those last mile, last 100-yard problems for residents.
Cool. Good to know.
And Dave, I would add to that there's never been a better time for folks to start talking locally at the township level or the town level, city, county. I guess the American Rescue Plan has broadband funding in it. All the details haven't been specified, but there definitely are categories of funding that will be going to cities and counties that have broadband infrastructure identified in them. What exactly that means yet, we don't know. But it's certainly it's something I would say for you, it's not too soon to start talking to folks about a plan to get better broadband access in your community, to reach out to the state telecom associations or the cable associations or the wireless associations, and start looking for those potential partners. And the state broadband offices can help with that. But now is the time to have those conversations.
It's great advice. Thank you.
Yeah, that is. And you actually answered one of our viewers' questions. So thank you. And so can I just, this may seem obvious to some, but it seems like if I've got an issue of broadband where I live, I hear you saying is that this is really resolvable at the local level, but it's going to take multiple actors, right, to come together and I guess lobby and put pressure create incentives for independent internet providers to come in. Is that kind of what you're saying, or to apply for funds, maybe for state or federal funds?
Exactly. It's the time to have those conversations and to, can't remember who this is attributed to, but start close in. Start in your community. Start by talking to your neighbors. Start by talking to your town supervisors or your county board members, and work with the state programs that are available, and let them help you make those connections to folks who may be interested in building out in your community. The other piece to be aware of is the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, which is another program through the FCC that's building out broadband infrastructure across our states. Too much to get into in a program like this, but it's another area where state broadband offices can assist communities with finding additional information about those possibilities.
Dave, we have a couple more viewer questions. I don't think we've had so many viewer questions ever on our show. Do you mind if I take the first one, and I'll leave the second one for you? And Alyssa, can I direct this to you? So kind of related to what Angie was talking about, what happens if I'm a citizen and I have bad access or poor access, and I go to my local common council, city council, whatever, town council, and I just am not getting heard, or I'm not getting a response? Is there anything else that an individual can do to try to create opportunities to improve broadband access?
So I would also reach out to, like Angie said, those provider associations, the provider that you think has facilities, but oftentimes you can reach out to our office. I would also say oftentimes people assume the only internet service provider is maybe like their local telephone provider. And there are often other opportunities outside of that. There might be a fixed wireless provider. There might be another wireline provider nearby that might be expanding. So sometimes our office can help people see broader opportunities or other people to connect with beyond local officials. And I would just like to shout out, maybe on behalf of Brittany, that the regional economic development corporations throughout the state are really doing a lot of leadership on this in Wisconsin. And so if local elected officials aren't the right path, reaching out to those regional economic development folks or into UW Extension 2 are two other really great resources in the state of Wisconsin for people to start working with on these projects.
Yeah, and I'll tackle yet another viewer question. What if this service was declared a utility? Then could government build the towers and lay the fiber to help support the suppliers who only pull in a few $billions each year?
Um, I'll start. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a whole huge what if broadband was utility, like the electrification, and how would that impact consumers and what would that do? I will say communities can build their fiber and towers, and then they can work with a private partner to get it to customers. There's opportunity to do some of that without broadband becoming a utility, because we have companies in the state that have invested millions and millions and billions of dollars in their infrastructure and their network and their customer service. And so the move to a utility would be a very, very big and far leap. But there's still opportunities for communities to build and own and lease their own infrastructure and, develop what they want. I'm going to pass it to Angie for the broadband utility question.
Well, I would agree with you there, Alyssa. We don't regulate broadband in our states, and there's a reason for that. That there are multiple options. A utility service implies monopoly control in exchange for regulation, and in spite of communities not perhaps having all of the options that they would like to have, like Alyssa said, the path from where we are today to a regulated environment would be a very long one. And in my opinion, not the right way to go.
Great, thank you. Oh my gosh, Eric, another viewer question.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. So another viewer is asking, I'd like to hear, Alyssa, this is directed to you, talk about households. I know there's a balance between putting fiber into the ground versus grants, just putting hookups to houses. I know that we need both, but I think a measurement that gets missed in the grant reporting is how many houses are impacted directly. Any comments or thoughts about that?
Yeah, and so, so far in the state's history, we've been doing a grant program that Angie ran for many years, so she can correct me. And it's very focused on the number of locations and the cost per location, and looking at the sort of that impact of both the quality of service the person's going to get and the number of locations that will be served and the service they have now. So, what's the difference in service? Because almost all of the state has some internet. It's that a lot of people don't have adequate internet. And so, yeah, the line extensions, I do think right now they're proposed for a $4,000 cap per household, where the household would be putting in the remainder. And so that's similar to a little higher than what the grant per location cost is. But I do understand the question that it's a sort of a tension between just helping one household versus a grant that might increase broadband for a whole community. And we see both strategies as important.
So when you look at what's going on in Wisconsin and Minnesota, I think we talked about this maybe a little bit earlier in the show, but how do we stack up to other parts of the country? I mean, what's going on elsewhere in the United States? Eric mentioned the Pew Research that rates Minnesota and Wisconsin pretty high. Is that from your perspectives, is that accurate?
Oh, absolutely. Listen, both states have done a terrific job of building a solid policy foundation and setting goals and developing these grant programs that are recognized around the country as being models to follow. At the same time, I can't say that Minnesota is taking the lead in terms of closing the digital divide or adequately addressing digital equity issues. But I'm very proud of the work that this state has done and proud of the work that's happened in the state of Wisconsin as well. There are states that don't have state broadband programs or state broadband offices. And again, in a time when there's likely to be federal funding coming to states to address broadband issues, having these offices in place, well-staffed, and having those partnerships with the industry as well to help close the gap, we are well positioned. We're not at the top, at least for Minnesota. I wouldn't put us at the top, but we're doing well.
Sorry, I was on mute there. Go ahead, Alyssa. Yeah, please.
I was just going to chime in. I think Wisconsin, we're not on the top. We have a lot of residents remaining in our state that don't have fast enough internet. And I think, the pandemic has really put the magnifying glass on that. People who were maybe getting by on sufficient internet, the pandemic made it clear that it wasn't enough. I do think, just like Angie, the policies, the system, and the leadership are there. And I think we have a really great sort of documented impact about how the work we've been doing in the state to increase it. But now every state is working really hard and really fast to increase it too. And so I think for us to remain a leader, we're going to have to continue to work really hard.
So to do that, to kind of put you guys on the spot a little bit here, I'm sure you're used to it, right? What is really needed then? Is it just a resource problem, right? Is it just a matter of, we need more money for these grants to be able to, help improve the service for these areas that you've mentioned, or people who are lacking? Or is it something more? I mean, do we need some different model, or do we need communities somehow to get more organized, like you were talking about earlier, around really reaching out to service providers and so on? What is needed to get to that last coverage?
Want me to go first? So resources are important, but it is not just a resource issue anymore. There are like strategic partnerships that need to happen. The issue of connectivity it's a bigger problem than the internet service providers alone in the marketplace is going to solve. So we need to keep making this table bigger. Maybe we need to bring in utilities or rural electric co-ops to help. Maybe we need to bring in libraries and really prop up their role as helping people with adoption. Maybe we need to build affordability programs to make sure that people are able to afford the service and we have really high take rates. So it's not resources alone. It's really leadership and planning and bringing some more people to the table to solve this problem. The market alone has not done it. And so we need some additional players in place to really leverage, to get everyone the service they need, and then everyone the devices and the skills to use that internet service and really participate.
Well said. I couldn't say it any better. When I think about, your prior question in talking about the progress our states have made or how our models are recognized, we still have these gaps, right? And particularly in our rural areas, we like to talk about the rural divide now, right? We have some of our rural communities have better infrastructure than some of their urban counterparts. At the same time, these are the areas that are going to be most challenging to serve. And that's where we have to look through a wider lens at who else can we bring to the table, what other options might be there to help these communities, and Alyssa, as I was looking at Wisconsin's grant awards, I've seen that the town of Boulder Junction in Vilas County received a very nice grant up there in their partnership with CenturyLink. And I can remember conversations with folks there. They were very well organized, but this took time. This took a lot of time and energy from that community working in partnership with that private partner, and a lot of fine folks who helped them get there. And that's where we're at right now. There's the pandemic just lit a fire on the sense of urgency on getting folks connected. And we know that these things take time to happen. So it's that, how do we bring together the folks who can do this quickly, thoughtfully, to get the job done?
I mean, you both are obviously, veterans in this space. And so I guess it gets a little bit back to that question about the roles, for example, of government. And, who can bring people together. As you pointed out, the free market has gotten us really far down the road, but not all the way. So, does government have a role in kind of bringing these last pockets together in some kind of cohesive way, or is it just going to have to be case by case, area by area, village by village?
Probably Angie, like, I guess I think, yes, we have such a big role in this, that, as everyone said, the pandemic has put such a magnifying glass on this, but, now participation in, democratic processes and town meetings and things they're only available virtual. Things that really are part of kind of essential rights of living in the state are only available online. And so I think it was always so important and critical for learning and work and social opportunity, but now it seems to me that it's becoming part of the fabric of what's important about our democracy for people to have access to the internet. And so all that educational opportunity and economic and health, telehealth, those are all really critical. But it feels to me now that we've turned this page, and it's really in some ways just about democratic participation for people to have internet access. And so I do think that the government has a strong role in really ensuring that those last pockets get the access that they need for that full participation.
And just enjoy hearing your response, Alyssa. Another big piece of this in my mind is the role that broadband access is going to play in our recovery out of this pandemic, right? And being a huge fan of the Telecommuter Forward program in Wisconsin and the Broadband Forward community program there, the silver lining, if there is one, out of this horrible pandemic is that telecommuting is now a viable option for a lot of folks, at least on the employer side. And you look at the communities where these investments in infrastructure have been made that allow people to live and work from where they want to. The job doesn't necessarily mean you have to live in a city or a state that you may not want to live in. Now you can go where you have good broadband access and have the quality of life that you'd like to have. And in my mind, that's the state's role in getting these lovely areas of our states connected. Some of the most beautiful areas of our state sometimes lack the access they need. And that's where the state can play a role in helping to bring those communities together with potential partners. And again, through these grant programs that can help incentivize that investment.
Yeah, a viewer just asked this question, which is, I think, articulated much better than I did. And in fairness, you guys, I don't know that you're the ones to answer this, but maybe you can try to take a stab at it. So whose job is it, or who should take the lead in bringing these additional partners to the table to address what's still needed?
In Minnesota, that happens a couple of different ways. It happens through the Office of Broadband Development, the office that I head up at our state's Department of Employment and Economic Development. It also happens through our governor's broadband task force. And again, it's the role of leadership and working together with industry and other state and local organizations that are interested in broadband expansion. We have a rural broadband coalition in Minnesota. They've done a fantastic job of bringing a diverse group of stakeholders together in a different way. There's a lot of conversations happening around the state around how do we solve this problem. And again, I think keeping an open mind to who should be there and keeping a watchful eye out for who we're missing.
Dave, I had a wrap-up question, but do you have anything you wanted to ask prior to that?
Well, I just want to make a comment. Angie and I were talking before the show started, reflecting on our time together working for the state of Wisconsin. And here I was over at the Department of Workforce Development, Yet broadband was an important issue for my agency at the time. And as a matter of fact, the Governor's Council on Workforce Investment identified broadband development as a strategic priority as part of its strategic plan. And I think the one thing that I took away from my experience in state government is that broadband development cuts across every agency of state government. It's an important issue for everybody. And frankly, I think you can extend that out to the state as a whole, whether it's Minnesota or Wisconsin. I mean, we all have a stake in having a very effective broadband network, right? So we all have access. And we've talked about it quite a bit here this morning. The pandemic certainly has really brought that home. So, I think the momentum is, from my perspective, the momentum is going to continue to build. And I really applaud both of you for your leadership efforts in this arena and doing everything that you could do to help make that happen and help be that convener. That's so important to get the right people to the table to do what we need to do. So thank you for all of that. So just a comment, Eric, I just wanted to.
Yeah, no, that's great. I appreciate that. And let me just ask this kind of final question to both of you. And look, you can also comment and make any comments you want if we haven't covered any topics you wanted. But the question is, look, we have pockets of success. Clearly, we have some pockets where we need help in both states. And we clearly are on a trajectory towards full broadband access. But my question is, realistically, how close are we? How long is this going to take? I was thinking about, we talked about electrification and how, people always hold that up as the model of how everybody, got into the 20th century at that time by the government stepping in many cases and providing that sort of last mile coverage and ensuring everybody had it. But if you look at the history, it took years. I mean, it took years to get that done. It seems like we don't have that time because people want it now, and like you said, COVID highlighted that. So just looking into the crystal ball for a minute, when do you think we're going to have quote unquote full and adequate coverage for all of the citizens of these two states?
Not as soon as we want. How's that for me? The next 3 to 5 years are going to be really telling as we see how this Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, how those investments get built out, and how frankly, how some of the wireless and satellite technologies are deployed. The next 3 to 5 years will be really telling in terms of how close we're getting to our goals. And again, in some ways, we're always working towards a moving target, right? Ideally, we get to a point where we have made that investment in infrastructure, and then we can continue our focus on how we provide digital equity and access for folks who may be facing barriers such as affordability or digital literacy skills that get in the way. And I'll leave you with this because it's so important. So with the federal stimulus that was passed in December, there was a program created called the Emergency Broadband Benefit. And it's important for folks to know about that. And Alyssa and I could both be resources for anyone looking for additional information, but it's a program that provides a $50 per month benefit to pay for the cost of broadband service for eligible households and $75 a month for households in tribal areas. Again, there are eligibility requirements, and the program hasn't officially begun yet, but I would imagine by early next month, we'll know more about the providers who are participating. So if you keep that on your radar, it is definitely a way for us to at least temporarily help folks during these times. But Dave and Eric, thank you for the opportunity to be with you today and for shining a light on this important policy issue. I appreciate you so very much. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Angie. I love talking with you. And I will say the Wisconsin Broadband Office is doing an emergency broadband benefit at 2 p.m. today. So if you go on our website, you can find the recording and registration. But that's sort of my, and we'll continue to have lots of information about that up on our website. And so I just, the when's it going to be done? The state of Wisconsin, you know, there's these opportunities with low orbit satellite that might be very promising or might not. We're still learning. I think both Wisconsin and Minnesota have a challenge of, we have some depreciating copper in our networks, right? And what's that going to mean? And will it be maintained? And what's that impact going to be as we try to strive towards these goals, as some of the current networks depreciate while we build new ones? It's really a significant challenge in Wisconsin. And then one of our other challenges is data. We generally know where a lot of the challenges are, but we don't precisely know. And the better we solve this problem, the more we're going to start needing a scalpel, and we're going to need really, really specific data. And so we have good data, but we will start to need great data as we get towards meeting our goals. And so people like to remind me that even electrification in the state isn't at 100%, you know, so I think, you know, we're still, we'll be up in the very high 90s, I think, in 2025. But those last addresses they'll be a challenge, or they'll continue to use satellite service, and maybe satellite service itself will get better. But just like Angie, I appreciate this opportunity so much and have loved talking with both of you and seeing Angie again, who I didn't get to see at conferences this year.
Well, thank you both. Wow, this has been really enlightening for me personally. I don't know a lot about this topic, so it was fantastic to hear about this, and frankly, for just realizing how much time, effort, and energy and work is going into this, and also a little bit dose of reality of how much work there is to do. So we appreciate, you know, your candor about that as well. So thanks to you both for being here. Thanks for your service to your respective states, and we'll forgive Angie for being a gopher at heart, but we're so glad that you were here, Angie. And of course, our apologies to Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson for running out of time for his usual visit, but of course, we'll have him on again next week. And thanks to all of our viewers today. We had some great questions. We really appreciate your participation.
And I would just like to add my appreciation to Angie and Alyssa for being here today. And Angie, I'm not so sure it was the light that we were shining on the topic today. I think it might have been the reflection from Eric's forehead, but the discussion was great, and we really appreciated the opportunity to learn more about a really critically important issue for the future of both of our states. We're off next week for spring break, so we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks, and have a great weekend, everybody.